All right, everyone. So my clock says 12:10. I'm in Denmark, so I'm assuming, I don't know, you might be calling in from all over, but the session starts now. Given that we only have 20 minutes, I'm not going to allow for the normal sort of 5 minutes sort of, leeway time where sort of people drop in. So we're just going to get started here. I'm really happy to speak to you all. My name is Ulrik. I'm a business angel and a former founder. I've founded and exited 3 startups, and currently I work as a pricing consultant, which is, for some reason, a lot of fun to me. I do sort of B2B SaaS pricing models and optimization, and I do it for a lot of startups on all stages and a lot of enterprise companies. Work with a lot of VC funds and have a bunch of fun with that. And I'm going to try to give you sort of the 20-minute sort of ultra fast crash course breakdown on how to do B2B SaaS pricing. So here goes. First off, that's the website. Check it out. Don't, in any case. Here we go. First question is that I always get asked whether it's a sort of a startup or a more mature company is, okay, so how do we actually price our SaaS product? And it's really difficult to actually answer this question, and I've come to sort of realize over the years that it's because this approach is actually the wrong question. If you try to actually price your product and say, okay, so I have a product, it does this, it has this functionality, it cost me, I don't know, $1 million to build, so what's the price here? It's an impossible, or what an engineer would call an ill-formed question. In reality, we have a lot of options that are just going to confuse us if we look at the product as a technical thing that should be priced. And in reality, instead, we should try and look at our customer and price the customer. So we have, I don't know, some building blocks, Lego blocks to actually build a pricing architecture. And they come in sort of 3 different forms. The first form is what I call the non-recurring item. So this is the startup and implementation cost, migration cost of data. It's you might have exit costs that are similar, sort of offboarding costs at the end of your customer lifetime. And meanwhile, we might have other types of transactional revenue, such as service fees, one-off, other sort of development fees that you charge specifically on one client, going on. So that's sort of one category of pricing blocks that we can put in to actually price a given customer that are non-recurring in nature. And we have 2 types of recurring pricing architecture blocks. One is flat fees, come in different forms. So a flat fee might be, well, to use the software, you're going to pay 2,000 euros a month, and that's that. And then on top, you might come a metric-based fee, which is anything that is a price per something, price per user, price per API call, price per gigabyte, price per active template, whatever it is that your software does. So with these 3 in mind, the flat fees before, during, and after the customer lifetime. Oh, sorry, the transactional fees before, during, and after, the flat fees that run recurringly, and the metric-based fees that run recurringly. So these are the things that we have in our pricing architecture to actually price the customer and not the product. So if you just remember one thing, it's sort of the approach or the attitude from this, which is don't price the product, price the customer. We have 2 ways mainly in terms of going at this, and it's essentially how to solve for the, let's say, price discrimination, how one customer, let's say a large enterprise customer, pays more than a small SMB type customer for your software. And I usually lay it out something like this. On one end, you have what I call packaging complexity. So that is taking your product and not selling all of it to everyone, but breaking it up into tiers or modules or add-ons and spinning out professional services and selling them not as one thing, but as several individual things that the customer can choose to buy or not, which means that not every customer buys the same thing from you, but there is a discrimination between the purchase, which will also allow you to discriminate on the price. That's sort of the one big axis that you can price discriminate with. The other axis is pricing complexity. So that is exactly what I went through here. Flat fees, multiple pricing metrics, having discount structures such as volume-based discounts. If you buy more than 200 units of our whatever, you get 10% off, or however you want to structure. So with these 2 in mind, having packaging complexity and pricing complexity, we actually get to increase our annual contract value. Meaning that if your annual contract value is relatively low, a few $1,000s a year, then you don't need a lot of packaging complexity or pricing complexity. Maybe you have 1 or 2 tiers and one pricing metric, just a basic price per user, and that's fine. But if you're selling enterprise software that goes above, let's say, $200,000 a year, then suddenly you need to have a much more modularized approach. Probably you have implementation fees, as well as flat fees, as well as some different pricing metrics, depending on what kind of product the customer is buying into. It's very rare that you see very high annual contract values driven by very simple products. Okay, so I'm going to give you just 2 rundowns, one on packaging and one on pricing, very quickly. So first, packaging. Okay, trains, best example ever. It's just like enterprise software in almost all respects, in that they solve a problem 100 times better than, not having a train. So if you walk on foot, it takes, I don't know, a year to cross, let's say, continental US. But when they built the transcontinental railroad, it took a week. So that's great. And instead of spending, let's say, all of your money and risk your life to get across the US, then you could just spend $10 and a week's time and not risk anything. And you would actually come across the US back in, I think, 1860s, when they invented the transcontinental railroad and built that. But just like with enterprise software, it costs a ton of money and a ton of time to actually develop the product. While you're doing that, you earn no revenue. But when you actually have the railroad built, when you've laid out the tracks and blasted through the mountains, then transporting one customer is almost free. So the cost to serve the customer is near zero, just as with software, presumably. But the cost to develop it and actually bring the product to market is substantial. So for this reason, I find that a lot of people that are selling software has this flawed intuition that any price is profit, right? So if it's free to transport a customer in our software, then if I just charge $10, then that's going to be $10 bottom line, because we don't have a cost floor to actually guide our pricing, right? So this is one of the reasons that we should not try and look at our product, because the product is, in this customer instance, free. We should try and look at the customer instead. So looking at the original railroad tycoons and how they looked at it, they say something like this: well, we have a market out there. The market consists of different types of customers, like some are poor, some are rich, some are in between. That's just how it is. We price discriminate by looking at how to price the market instead of pricing our product. The product becomes a tool for us to price the market instead of trying to price the product itself. So if we look at this just as a schematic, we can say, well, we have different customers in our market. They have different willingnesses to pay, right? And here I've just laid them out in first, second, and third class. You can sort of see where this is going from a packaging perspective, which is that some are actually willing to pay more than others. And if we look at our pricing as just a simple optimization problem, in that what is the one best price that we can put into the market, we end up with something like this: a single undifferentiated ticket structure. So no complexity at all, which of course is good for some customers. Some will be sort of optimally priced at whatever particular price you choose. But for a lot of other customers, it's not going to be optimal, right? For some, they will still buy, but you will have an invisible loss in that they would be willing to pay more if you'd asked it. And for others, you will actually be too expensive and they will be priced out of the market, right? So in order to actually price the market instead of just pricing your product, you actually start to deliver different products into this market or different packages to these. So in the train example, we invent the first class and we charge differently on the first and the second class. And for the third class, we can also invent that. So this becomes sort of one of the psychological issues that I see a lot of founders actually have with this pricing, is that it can actually be difficult to once you have built a relatively comprehensive solution, to actually re-engineer a minimum viable product in your market to actually sell to this long tail of smaller customers. So just know that it can be done. And in the original railroad example, the tycoons had this problem that everybody wanted to buy the cheapest tickets. So first class would sell out because those customers actually wanted that. And then second class would be empty while everybody bought the cheap third class tickets. So they kept re-engineering their third class to make it worse and worse and worse, to try and force people to actually buy second class, the ones that could afford it, so that they actually would fill up every class. And the final solution is sort of as ingenious as it is horrible, in that what they actually did in the end was they took the roofs off the wagons, right? So they had roofs before. It wasn't that the roof became a feature that they added to the third class later. It was a feature to begin with, but they then took it off to actually force people onto second class, because actually sitting for a week in open air across continental US becomes such a bother that you actually upgrade and do these things. So what we see is that every founder that builds enterprise software and brings software into the market actually wants to create a first-class experience. So same with trains. Everybody imagines the railroad as a first-class experience, but that's not necessarily where your market is. Your market might be across several different types of experiences. And if your underlying technology, the railroad track itself, can actually support that, then the products that you put on that track, the wagons and the classes, are actually what monetizes that market optimally. So think about this. Think about differentiating your capability, the railroad track, with your packaging, the actual wagons that you put on there, and you'll have sort of a good mental framework to start doing real packaging for your market. Okay, that is the packaging complexity issue. Second, pricing metrics. So a pricing metric is anything that is a price per something, price per user, price per gigabyte, price per whatever. It can be something that is sort of licensed upfront. I want the ability to onboard 50 users, and that's that. Or it can be a usage-based metric, meaning I just want to pay for whatever I use. So you just measure my, active users as per the Slack model, for example, and then I pay in arrears. Regardless, it's still a price per X. And it's the pricing metric is sort of the one thing that you want to get right in having a good pricing architecture. And I'm going to sort of explain why. First, it must be measurable and executable. If you can't count it, you can't price it, you can't invoice it, just how it is. Then we need to think about the value chain position. I'll show you what I mean. And the expectation to pay dynamics, I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so let's do a little case. This is 2021 AI. They're a software company. They have an AI platform called Grace that they sell to banks. And this is a version of their pricing. I took the numbers out and it's changed a little bit just to anonymize their pricing, but this is a version of their pricing. And as you can see, they have two metrics. On the horizontal version here, they have number of models in production. So more models in production means higher price. And then on the vertical axis, they have users. So if you have 8 users and 10 models, you pay in this matrix 10,000 euros per month for the Grace license platform. All right, perfect. So whenever we have a pricing metric, we want to ask ourselves, the first question we want to ask ourselves is this metric correlated with the value that we bring with the software? So does more models mean more value? Does more users mean more value? And in both of these instances with 2021, the Grace platform, it's yes, right? More users, more value, more models, more value, great. However, we need to ask a second question as well. Is there also demand for this metric? Is there actually demand for more models? Is there actually demand for more users? And here it's actually diverges, right? Because you can imagine if you sell an AI platform to a bank, do they want more AI models? Yeah, sure. That's why they're buying the platform, right? They want to have, let's say, a new sort of AI track in their business. They want to do credit scores and they want to do value at risk and they want to do a million things, AI with all of their data. So that's great. The more, the better. But do they actually want more users? Is that a demand for them? It's not that they don't want users. It's just that, it's not part of the value in and of itself. It's sort of correlated, but it's sort of not valuable. So you need to sort of figure out why that is. So in the Grace example here, no customer had ever bought more than 8 users at all, right? So every bank would say, how many users do I need? And then they would say, well, more users, more value. And they would say, yeah, we're going to start with 8. And then 2021 had been annoyed. So they said, well, now we're going to invent these included components out on the right-hand side. So if you want certain features like Spark, we're going to consider you large and enterprise, and we're just going to charge you accordingly, regardless of how many users you have. So that was annoying to their customers. So we wanted to sort of figure out what was going on. And this is what's going on. Imagine you're a bank and you actually want to do AI, right? Here's the value chain, the process that you go through when you want to do AI. And imagine that for your customers, regardless of what you're delivering through your software, you're supporting some sort of value chain as well. So think about what's the value chain of my customer that I'm supporting or tapping into in some way. For Grace, it was this. The bank said, we want to do AI, so we are going to create an AI budget and an AI team and get them going, right? Then the team goes out, gets ideas for AI models, sources a lot of data, and starts to train the models. Then they deploy those models back into the bank. So say, well, we have a credit score model, it does credit scores, and that's great. And then eventually those credit scores work better than they did before. So now the bank earns more money and KPIs increase, and that's great. That's the value chain, right? So at one end, we had a project, the AI team, and at the other end, we had better KPIs because the AI team did something and it worked and it brought value to the bank. But it's a value chain, means that one end is input, aka investment, aka cost, and the other end is output, aka profits, aka value, right? So we input costs and we output value. That's the value chain. That's the nature of it. We support this value chain, meaning that every step of the way we're with the customer in helping them do this, but we can also actually choose to measure every link in the chain and price every link depending. And so we could say that if we price the first link, we price per users, we actually price the team, right? If we price the data sources, we might price per gigabyte. If we price the number of models, we do that. If we price data outputs, we do that. If we price something at the end of the chain, the customer will feel that we share in the value created. If we price something at the beginning of the chain, the customer will feel as we are increasing the cost of the value chain, right? Which is a hell of a different experience for the customer to be priced on. So I usually say value chains are like rainbows. The gold is at the end. So attach your value chain or your pricing at the end of the customer's value chain with your pricing metric. So that's the value chain position. Now comes expectation to pay. So because you could say then, okay, so if we go back, should we then just price per data outputs? Just price the number of credit scores that they get out of the model that they produced on our license or on our platform? Question mark? No, for this following reason. Okay, here is the plumber problem, as I call it. Imagine you're at home and you have a water pipe that breaks and there's water everywhere in your kitchen. You call a plumber, emergency, he shows up, emergency. He says, wow, you're lucky I could find parking right in front of your house. Where's the problem? You say, it's in the kitchen, there's water everywhere. And right before he walks into your home, he looks at your nice floors and says, oh, I'm just gonna take my shoes off, puts them outside, walks in, fixes your problem, dries up all the water, and then leaves and said, you know, thank you, it's just like broken O-ring or something. I'll send you an invoice. He goes home and sends you an invoice. There are 3 line items on the invoice. First line item is time and material, right? He spent an hour, he had a spare part with him, he's going to charge you for that, 250 euros. Okay, fair enough. Do you want that? Yeah, definitely. That's why you called him. Are you expecting to pay that? Definitely. Second line item, parking. So he paid for parking, that's on the invoice. You're going to pay for his parking because he's helping you. Is there demand for that? Do you actually want that? Not really, but do you expect to pay for it? Well, somebody has to pay for it, so you might as well, right? So you think it's fair that he's charging you on this. Third line item, shoe fee. He took off his shoes. Really good service, 10 euros. Is that valuable to you? It is. If surveyed would say it's very valuable, but you know, do you consider it fair? Not really, right? So we have this dichotomy, this balance to strike between value and fairness and expectation to pay. So if we go into the 2021 AI and say, well, here we can actually sort of plot out their 4 pricing metrics: data outputs, deployed AI models, users, and gigabytes processed, and see that data outputs, even though it's at the end of their value chain, is actually not really high on the expectation to pay, which I also sometimes call the fairness metrics, which is, sure, we have demand for, let's say, credit scores out of our model. We just don't think that it's fair that you charge us by them. But the deployed AI models sit really, really well in the midst of this. So if we go back to the 2021 AI price list, the recommendation here would be ditch this and here's your pricing, right? Just make users free, charge based on models. They sit far enough back in the value chain. They are actually considered fair to be charged by from your customer. So just use that. So in summary, you have a capability of Railroad, package on that, figure out how you're actually going to sell, what you're going to sell to whom, then build a pricing model, good value chain analysis, pricing metric, and so forth. Then you figure out price points. Do it in that order. The sequence is important. First packaging, then pricing metric, then you're done. Okay, that was 20 minutes, as fast as it's been done ever. You know, I don't know, like and subscribe at willingness2pay.com. I'm gonna hang out and answer a few questions if there are anyone in the hangout here. But that was 20 minutes from me. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it makes sense. If not, you know, you can YouTube more videos of me where I say the same thing but slower. All right, cheers everyone.